So the next page is out. Might not be.
Okay. We're here for the enforcing the national or provincial building code session. So we're going to start about 5 minutes. We're giving everybody a little chance to come back from lunch. We'll dim the lights, have the music on, talk about building code so everybody can have a nice little nap here. Keep it open or just might as well shut it. Okay, hi everybody. We're here for the enforcing the national or provincial building code session done by Andrew Cullum. Andrew's been he's been in the construction industry for about 15 years. He's an experienced handy guy. We would call him a high-end finishing carpenter. He's certified as a dense pack insulator, trained for passive house tradesperson and wet certification. And for the last 4 years, he's been working for the Chibougamau First Nation Council on a SUL account. Andrew will speak to you in a second. First, we're going to do a spot prize. So put up your hand if you have a question. Anybody have a question? Bring it over there. Okay, you can win the prize. There you go. Okay, if we're all ready, Andrew will come up and do his presentation.
Hello, everyone. It's finally nice to be back in person and doing some presentations and not staring at your computer screen, wondering who's watching you. One topic I'd like to talk about is something that with the enforcement of the building code seems like a bit of a strong word to use. It's hard to use enforcement when you don't have a building code active to use as well as using the building code. So for my job, I like to use the process of helping building capacity or capacity building through the inspection process. It also gives me the opportunity to use some educational moments to work with the people in the community who are building, to explain the processes and why we use the building code as a general guideline to building a house. Some remote communities don't have access to traditional training as easily as when you're closer to a larger city. So it does present some challenges. And the other thing too is making sure that I listen to people building in the communities too, because there's a lot of struggles that they have with building materials, delivery of materials that you would typically be able to go to the hardware store or pick up, and it's not needing to be put on a plane and then flown up and you're delayed 3-4 weeks. So that's one struggle that the communities that I work for in Chibougamau have. You're relying on winter roads, and it can prolong the building process by quite a bit. As a building technician and inspector for Chibougamau First Nation Council, my main duties involve plans examination, working with the communities to help interpret the national and provincial building codes. Me personally, I like to use the Ontario Building Code. It is a little more relevant to where the Chibougamau communities are. There isn't a requirement for them to do that, but it just sets a bit of a higher standard, I believe, for where we're building. We also help with site layouts and elevations, ensuring that the homes aren't buried too deep in the ground, they're not too high. I also provide the inspections for critical stages of the building process. So footings, foundations, structural framing, HVAC and plumbing, fire separations, insulation, vapor barrier, fireplaces, wood stoves, gas or oil. We have a lot of oil or electric heating in our communities. So you might need to bring in a TSSA inspector or someone like that. Also ESA, if you can do the septic, then you need to either bring your health authority in to do that. And in larger buildings, we have life safety equipment. So your fire suppression systems that you would have in larger buildings, like a nurse's station, schools, things like that. So I don't do those, but I help the communities bring those people into the community to make sure the inspections are done and we've got safe buildings for everybody to use. For myself, I try to, you have to look at a building and almost picture yourself living in there. What would you want? You would want a safe home. You wouldn't want to have to worry about if you did have a fire that you wouldn't have fire separations, that your heating equipment is safe, so that if you have an oil furnace, even a natural gas furnace or a wood stove, that it's installed correctly. And you don't have to worry about it. You can kind of set it and probably do this. Set it and forget it and not have to worry about whether or not it was installed correctly or not. And that also is my job, to make sure that people understand that these inspections need to be done at a certain time, and work with work with the community members to make sure that if there are any deficiencies that they can be done in a reasonable amount of time as well. So if you need to have your stove inspected to make sure that it's done before heating season, so someone's not using a brand new stove that could create other issues like a house fire, or making sure that the smoke and CO alarms are installed and working. And I always try to explain that a lot of times you'll go to a house and the smoke and CO is removed off the wall and it's put in a closet because you've got a false alarm. So I think it's important seeing it at the framing stage and when you've got the wiring in there to talk with the electrician and give them some different ideas on where to put it within the manufacturer's instructions, but maybe don't put it on a ceiling, put it down from the wall a little bit. So when you open your stove, it's not causing a false alarm and it's waking everybody up in the house and being a bit of a nuisance. But those are the education moments that I like to talk to people with. And most of the times when you're able to listen to the issues that people have in homes, you can get a lot farther than just trying to enforce this building code that, like I said it before, enforcing is a strong word. People get afraid of that, and that's not what we're trying to do. We're trying to make sure that everybody's got a healthy place to live. The other thing too is making sure that the houses aren't too close together, because that can create other issues with, if a house does catch on fire, is it going to catch the house next to it on fire? You can also do some fire protection and things like that on the outside of buildings to prevent that. But if you have the space, it's better just to keep them distanced apart. And like in duplexes, you want to make sure you have your fire separations between the buildings. Yeah.
While you're on the topic of being close proximity to each other.
Yep.
Is there a certain rules that be apart according to the building?
I'd have to look that up. I don't have the code with me. If I had the building code, you'd have to give me 2.5 minutes to answer that question, because that's all they allow for the building code exams. But there is a regulation.
That's the case, you have a portal or somewhere where I can access the information of the current building codes.
Yeah, I know the Ontario Building Code is it's available online, and I'm sure other building codes are as well. It can be kind of challenging to navigate through the information to get to the right answer. That's why it's always good if you could have someone in your, like a housing coordinator in the community, who could maybe take a few building code courses and work with the information that's relevant to your community. It can be really helpful. Yeah, and there's also in that building code, you'll find other ways to put buildings closer together, but having those fire separations in place so that you don't spread a fire from one to the next. Typically in the communities I work with, that's not an issue because there's lots of space. It is getting in some areas that there are issues with water, and we have to be very, very conscious about where we put homes, so that there have been some homes or duplexes, and that's more of the case in the communities, in the Shibugama communities. Oh, went too far. There we go. So this is a picture of me when I was a kid, putting my head through a railing, and my dad pulling the railing apart to get my head out. This is why I decided to get into the occupation of doing building inspections. I'm just joking. That's not me. But these are real life situations that some people find themselves in, and maybe not as comical as this, but there are things that can happen, and there's reasons why the building code is there, and it's because someone has been injured, someone has been, in the worst case scenario, someone has died because of of something that has happened. And a lot of times, unfortunately, codes don't change until that happens. So we know that some people might feel that it's a lot of red tape, but in the end, it's protecting the people who are using the buildings, whether it's a house or it's a large building. That's what we're trying to do, right? And then community safety too. So when we have a larger building, there's things in place like wheelchair accessible ramps, wheelchair accessible bathrooms, fire suppression, and is down to like the staircases and things like that. I know I was working on a project, and I've got a picture later on where something got missed in the plans, and it ended up being a downspout that came out right in front of a set of stairs. So you've got the landing on the stairs, and then you got this big, huge water runoff from the downspout. So it's a tripping hazard now. So if someone's using your large building and they trip and they hit, land on the stairs, someone's going to get hurt, and they could get seriously hurt. And unfortunately, that happens quite a bit. It happens, in municipalities, and it also happens in the First Nation communities. Structural integrity. So I always like to tell builders, whether they're outside contractors or local laborers, that your structural integrity begins right from the foundation up. So ensuring that you've got the proper compaction to start your foundation with, that your excavation isn't too deep, so it's not going to start filling up with water. And there's different design considerations you can use, and that kind of goes back to the plans examination. You'd want to look at that. If you know the community or the area you're building, you can make the adjustments to, let's say, your footing to accommodate for a wet location if you had to. The footing size, like I said about the footing size, you can make it wider, you can make it deeper for wet locations. Making sure that your beams are properly sized for what it's intended to do. If you've got a 2-story building, it changes compared to a single-story building. If you've got point loads, dead loads, and things, and you're just kind of, if you're able to catch it in the plans examination, that's always ideal. But a lot of times you can run into issues where you're kind of panic buying the materials because of winter road constrictions, especially with remote communities. Sometimes I don't get a set of plans until April, and then it's like, oh, we got to fly in some different type of material to make it code compliant. Lumber quality seems to be an issue sometimes too. Making sure that you've got as straight of lumber as you possibly can. And I try to do it as much as I can, where you go up to the community and see the materials that have been delivered through the winter. And it is difficult. It's a bit of a mad scramble. You have people working in the middle of the night unloading trucks, and it kind of gets put all over the place. But it is good if you can work with the community members and try to have an organized chaos so that at least you know what you're working with in the spring when you start building. And if you do, or if I'm doing an inspection and I see something that's damaged, like a truss, we've got to fix that before we continue on with the construction. I mean, I've seen it quite a bit of times where you can try to sandwich like some 2x4s on either side and nail it. But the best route is to reach out to your tribal council. If you've got a housing and building inspector, there are ways from the truss manufacturers to properly mend a broken truss. And those guidelines are there because, again, they're engineered that it's there's proper practices to follow and make sure it's done properly. The other thing too, hurricane straps and like straps for your foundation to your floor system. They're a bit of a pain in the butt, and they can cut you open pretty easily when they're hanging all over the place. But I've seen houses that have been blown off the foundation. I've seen roofs ripped off buildings, and with weather, climate change, and things, these weather events that are happening recently that are kind of unpredictable. It's that you have to really stress that this is an important part. It seems silly that little tiny band's going to hold the house together, but in the end, it's going to prevent that house from falling over and injuring anybody who is in the house. Building longevity. So a lot of times when I find a house that has had an issue, and this is usually after the house has been around for a while, and if something has been forgotten or removed, like in this picture here, we've got a downspout that the elbow's been removed or it's fallen off and your splash pad's been removed. This house here was the crawl space was full of water, and because it had been removed or missing for so long, it had filled the crawl space full of water, and then the sump pump burned out, and you can't go to the store and buy a new sump pump. They've got to be flown in. There's a bit of a process there that needs to happen through within the community. And so with the building longevity, if we can try to prevent stuff like that, if you're doing an inspection and you see something like that, I know it's not enforcing the building code, but when you're building a new home and you see this, you have to be able to make sure you pick up on it, because something like this can destroy a house within a year if you've got a wet season. It lowers the cost of maintenance throughout the lifetime of the home, catching these small things that they do create big problems, because this water in the crawl space, the sump pump went, now the crawl space is full of mold, and it's a bigger project to try to clean that up. And it takes a lot of resources now, where a 30-cent elbow or $1, however much it is, it's not, that's irrelevant. It's just, you know, it can cause tens of thousands of dollars that the communities don't have to spend on small issues, right? And then energy conservation. One issue with energy conservation, and some people look over it and they just say, "Oh, just get the house up, it doesn't matter." But it does in a cold climate, because if you don't have enough insulation, or you have your vapor barrier in the wrong spot, the wrong area of the wall, you create bigger pictures or bigger problems. You create mold, you get the dew point brought in closer to the inside of the house. You'll have issues in your attic with improper insulation, or if you don't have enough insulation. I've seen a lot of houses where if they've done bats of insulation and it's crushed in the corner over top of the top plate, it'll condensate there, and then you'll have ice damming, and then it destroys your roof. So things like that, I'm a bit of an energy conservation nut when it comes to that. It's not just for saving money, it's because why would you know, your house is like a car that idles all day long, and everybody wants the fuel efficient vehicle because gas prices are so high right now, where your house, like I said, is sitting there all day long and it's just idling. And if we can save a little bit and make sure that the houses are have the proper insulation in the attic, the walls, and you've got your wing insulation, it'll prevent future damage or mold. The building codes around this are changing constantly. I know in BC, there's a stepped building code, and by 2032, they will be building all their homes to a net zero standard. And the federal government was working on a plan to change the national building code to net zero ready by 2023. It's not in place yet, but it is a plan that they're looking at to try to change it, because there's some commitments that the federal government has made with some energy conservation and carbon emissions and things like that. So I believe it's going to change at some point. I don't know if 2030 is going to be the number or the date, but it's something that we have to be conscious about. There's new technology, new strategies, and new processes of building homes that are going to make them more efficient. And it's already happening. I think it's great that if we can kind of follow suit and try out some different building processes to make our homes more efficient. That's about it. Does anybody have any questions or anything like that? Okay.
Only concerning the roofs you're talking about, which is your experience? Is it better sandwich type roofs, or is it better the open type roofs with better?
Sorry. My question is concerning the rooftops themselves.
Yeah.
Do you, with your experience, do you prefer the sandwich type roofs or the open roofs, ventilated roofs?
Like, are you talking like a hot roof or like a vaulted ceiling that's got like a sip or something like that?
That's right, because the with all the winds.
Yep.
And the micro, the wind, the snow that's so small, it goes through
Yeah.
the louvers and comes back into the ceilings. That's where you get the frost up there and damages everything. So what do you think of the sandwich roofs?
I like them. I have seen some issues with them, not a lot. They have to be sealed properly, because once you start getting a building really, really tight, it's going to pick on those few areas that are a weak point. But I'm not saying I don't think they're great. You have to use the right type of insulation.
So if you have an air exchanger that gives you a change of air every hour, for
Yep.
example, okay, but up there we understand that it's a lot colder. So
Yeah.
you have your fresh air. You have to almost put a heater
You do.
to put your fresh air coming into the building itself.
Yep.
That means you have to organize it. Do you preconize that we should put like a media foam in the soffits to prevent the micro
For sure.
snow to go in?
Yeah.
Okay,
Like Keith said, I do cellulose. So anytime I do that, you put like the insulation dams in there and keep your 2-inch airspace between your sheeting and then your insulation material, whether it's fiberglass or it's like a cellulose or whatever type of insulation you choose to use. And that if you do it to code, you're going to have more insulation. If you follow the Ontario Building Code, I think it's like R60 for the area that I'm working in. And you need a really high dam. So it's sitting, I think it's 48 inches up the roof is how high it has to go.
because we've seen, I work up at Nunavik.
Yeah.
Quite a bit there. And the winds are so strong that when we do use cellulose, it goes through the soffit, it sort of disturbs the cellulose.
Yep.
And it builds bundles. And at one point in the ceiling, we could have no insulation there, but too much there, and then it fogs the soffits.
Yeah.
So
And that's, I call that wind washing with the insulation,
okay.
because you've got a lot of pressure on the building. And then what I try to do if I'm planning for doing cellulose, I might not put end vents on the gable ends of the house. You just put a ridge vent in, and you make sure that you don't have too much vent, like lower soffit venting, and then you don't want to have enough ridge venting or any other kind of vents that you'd put in. A lot of our communities, you get 3 feet of snow on the roof. So those little mushroom sort of vents don't necessarily work all that well. They get plugged full of snow, and then now your roof is not venting the way it's designed to. So I've actually had people build raised gooseneck vents so that they actually come above the snow. It can vent your roof properly. Because with those mushroom ones, what happens is you'll get an ice dam there, and then it backs up and it goes right back into the building, leaks on your insulation. If it's fiberglass, if it's cellulose and it gets wet, then it'll freeze up in the attic, and it just creates a lot of issues, right?
And have you heard of when the buildings are on the ridge of the oceans there, the salt air?
Yep.
That damages all the plaques that are on those roof trusses, and the rust at one point that damages the whole thing also.
Yeah.
We've had to remove some of those also. So is that being addressed by the code in some sort?
I'm not sure about that. It should be, if it's an issue, it should definitely be looked at. And that's why, like, the building code is evolving. There's a bit of a process for it to change, but it does evolve. So that's something that could be. Yeah. Are there any more questions?
Just to elaborate on that too, Andrew.
Yep.
Okay. Yeah, I was just saying the building code, when you run into certain designs that are not necessarily in the code, that's why you hire an RCA or a consultant to make those type of decisions for you. So sometimes it's not in the code, the answer is not there. You're going to an expert where the code will tell you to do that. A lot of newer designs, you run into that these days.
Andrew, I'm just wondering, what your thoughts are on who's enforcing the code when there's, you know, you find a deficiency in the construction process and you give them their report. Who does that enforcement for you?
Yeah, so essentially when I see a deficiency, there's an inspection form template that I fill out. And I can list the deficiencies on that report with photos. And if you have to, you can label the photos. You can actually mark them up so that they can see exactly where the issue is. I do include the code references because I think that's a good thing, but I also follow it up with a phone call because not everybody understands the building code language. It's not the easiest thing to interpret. So that is something that's really important. When you do, for myself, I do the teaching, I do the educational moments in the community, working with the community, the local community members. When I have an outside contractor come in, that's when you have to kind of, they should almost know better, right? When it comes to that. So you still work with them and you do the educational moments, explain the building code, but you can have a little more resistance sometimes with outside contractors. And it's a case of having one bad contractor that makes you feel that way too, right? We've had some communities that have been, I had one where it was an Atco trailer and the contractor tried to convince me that blue pallets were acceptable to put the building on. And I had never seen that. I've never seen anybody try to justify putting something together that I knew wasn't going to last more than a couple of years. And it frustrated me. And you have to keep your cool. But I made sure that the chief and council were aware, and I took them aside and I said, I'm not sure if this is a guy to be working in your community doing this kind of stuff, because I know the local like the local laborers know how to do this better than him. And this would not be acceptable to the local contractors who've been doing this. It's almost an insult if you allow that to happen.
So you're allowing the First Nation to have the responsibility of enforcing that code requirement?
No, the First Nation, if I had chief and council do a BCR saying I could use the Building Code Act, but I'm not sure that would happen if they would allow me to use the Building Code Act to do like a stop work order or something like that, or order to uncover things. It's usually, I don't have an issue with that. You can go in the community, you can talk to people, we can work through it. And there's usually a solution. I've never had any issues where you have to escalate it to a point where, you know, there's a confrontation or a point where you have to have someone remove drywall or take things apart. Not saying it can't happen, but I personally haven't experienced that.
I had a question. You were talking about hurricane straps.
Yeah.
Because you notice the weather is getting more severe and severe. Will these be mandatory in the code, and how do you put them on, and where do you get them?
In Ontario, they are, and they're really simple to install. They're the size of, they're like this, about this big, and they just wrap around the truss. They nail to the two top plates into the side of the truss. Doesn't seem like that would hold it together, but it does. As long as you use the right nails. You got to use hanger nails. Don't use screws.
What are the cost of these?
I'm not sure of the cost. I don't think, maybe like $5 to $10 a piece or something like that. They're not. Yeah. They've been around for quite a while.
Are there any resources or programs for educating, say, counselors on these subjects?
On building code, there
Yeah.
are OBOA. If you do the Ontario Building Code, they do have some courses, some technical courses. Some of them require you to do an exam when they're done. Some of them aren't. I've done, you know, like you'd have a plumbing course. So at least your housing manager, your housing coordinator could go to the course and understand, okay, well, that's why, you know, the plumbing wasn't code compliant was because it wasn't sloped properly or the venting was in the wrong spot. There are courses available. They're more available now because of, unfortunately, because of COVID, they're being done online, but it's good for the communities who are remote because you can do it in your office now. You don't have to travel to Toronto or anywhere like that. I can't speak for like any other province, but that is something that, you know, would be an interesting, it'd be nice to be able to bring that kind of training, and whether it's just a national building code to a conference and have someone talk about it. Any more questions?
Hi. I became the director of housing since 2015, and what I find frustrating that our maintenance staff find is that when they have to go and investigate something that's happening in the house and they find codes are not up to par. I mean, like, they were passed, and then like for 2005 CMHC housing, they didn't have no paper barriers. And so now they're fixing up those houses, and the trusses and the roof trusses, it's all rotten and around the doors and walls. So they're fixing that. Like, how does the inspector pass that?
I couldn't speak for that. I wasn't the one inspecting it, but it can happen. Things can slip through, and that's unfortunate that happened to your community. I've seen some things too that maybe it was a different way of thinking of where you put your vapor barrier, where you don't. It can create issues. I know we had some modulars go up, and they were used modulars to one of the communities, and then I started doing my inspection on it and found out by looking at a label underneath the sink that they came from the States. So in the United States, down in the southern states, they actually put the vapor barrier on the opposite side of the building. They put it on the outside because of air conditioning, and you're not heating the building. So I have seen it. I know exactly what you're talking about. I've seen a lot on rim joists where the vapor barrier is put on the outside instead of on the inside. And I've seen houses that are completely rotted out around the building, and it's, you know, a 20-year-old home that's been done like that. So it is unfortunate that it did slip through, but this is why we have the conference. We have to get together and see all these issues and listen to each other's stories, and do better for the future, right?
And we have some homes too, in 2013 homes that have the same thing around the truss and the flooring area, Got mold coming inside and outside, and it's rotting, you know, like my guys, they say like they're opening a can of worms,
Yeah.
you know, like, so it takes longer to fix things.
Yeah. One thing that I always find is like, and I kind of stressed on the energy conservation, like if I'm doing a vapor barrier inspection, looking for something even as simple as fiberglass being crushed too much in the corner and you can see the gaps around it. I've worked on a lot of homes too, not just doing the inspection, but I've done a lot of renovations and builds, and it goes back to that energy conservation, the building longevity. Let that one little thing slide, and you can completely destroy a building, especially in a northern community. You've got extreme temperatures, whether it's low or high. If you can't catch it, and unfortunately, as a building inspector, sometimes things do slip. You know, if I always take, like, I'll take a picture. I'll pick pictures of a home, and I've got like 200 or 300 pictures of the same home. You can go through, and you really have to. You have to take your notes so that if you see something, you write it down. Sometimes I'm guilty of not taking enough notes, but if I see a problem, I'll zoom right up to it so I can at least try to use that as a reminder when I'm going through the pictures and putting it into a photo log. Like I'm not, when you're doing inspections, just documenting everything you can possibly see. So later on, when you do go to that house, you can see what happened. Sometimes I see when HRVs are turned off too, that can create a lot of other issues as well. And it creates condensation issues. And when you do have those small areas that maybe do leak, that's when it starts to pick on those, and you can have it concentrated around windows and doors. I usually see it around the perimeter of a house where you've got a lot of framing materials and you maybe didn't have the right amount of insulation coverage over top of that, where you can get a lot of condensation built up and rot. And it's unfortunate. It happens. And like I said, we've got to do better to make sure we catch those. But not everything is visible either. So.
I guess I'm kind of trying to, I understand the lady here that just finished talking about the homes on the First Nations, and I can sympathize with her in that sense. And oftentimes the housing manager themselves are hired, and they need expertise, and they need to know, courses that need to be taking place so they can understand the codes.
Yeah.
And a lot of times, and this happened in our community, is if the First Nation, the contractors, because they're licensed, right? They have to have a license to build a building, for instance, a structure. And oftentimes they'll take shortcuts or try to quicken the contract itself, like the 6 months to build a house. And a lot of times they just do it roughly, and because nobody's gonna go there and study their work, so to speak. And then you find out a few years down the line, they didn't. There's mold, and there's the vapor preparers weren't installed properly, or whatever. And I think in a lot of ways, it's kind of the contractors are the ones building the buildings, and they kind of do a shoddy job, so to speak. And my question to this would be, when, say, for instance, my housing manager hires a contractor from outside the community, and they're going to build the buildings or a couple of buildings, what kind of a question would we be asking them prior to them taking on a contract? Like, would one of the questions be, do you understand the building codes in Ontario? Would that be out of line for say, for instance, if I hired you and asked you that question, and what kind of license, is there a special license that they need to show that says that they understand the building codes? You know what I mean? Because
Yep.
just sometimes contractors will just say, yeah, I'll build this in 4 months and save you some costs. And sure enough, the First Nation only can afford so much dollars that they're given by the government to build that house. And oftentimes the materials themselves are cheap materials. The baseboards, the windows, the doors, they're not structured in the same way that other buildings are in the urban areas or towns. And so the materials themselves are not good quality materials. Therefore creates a lot of repairs in a few years. We have to renovate quickly, and where the contract says it's good for 20 years, the roof shingles are good for 20 years, and then you find yourself short. The band then suffers the consequences of paying for the repairs to the homes. And I guess that's where I'm coming from, is that we're trying to train our First Nation members to take over the housing projects that we have in the community. But I guess in a lot of ways, that's the direction that I think the First Nation should take, is and the government should understand that we need the dollars to train our community members to build good quality homes. you know, they talk about good quality homes for First Nations, and they have a right to good quality homes. And so they should be able to give extra dollars to buy good quality material and not, you know, paper doors. Like the bedroom doors that they supply is just, they only last maybe 5 years and they start molding up because they're made out of paper. Or the baseboards, the molding around the windows are not, you know, they can last so well, but then they warp and it creates mold in the homes. So I guess that'd be my big question that I would ask the government or provincial government. If you're gonna, you know, talk about codes, should a code be protecting the home's longevity, as you're saying there about the longevity of the home? So we should be getting more dollars to get a good door. Like the exterior doors are $200 that are in a home right now, you know, and they don't last that long. The doorknobs come off, the frame starts warping out because of the weather conditions or whatever. So they should be able to give us enough money to give good quality material in these homes and take it last. So I guess that's why I'm saying there's a few things that I just said here, but my question would be to contractors. What kind of question should I ask the contractor?
Yeah, so what I try to do if I'm helping a community find a contractor, I go through the RFQ process where you're doing a request for a quote. I make sure that each section of the home, so I have a list of like what's been delivered in the community, the building plan. There's also a requirement in each section. So plumbing, septic, framing, finish grade, all has to be completed to the building code, the inspection process. It's got listed when it's going to be inspected. So you can't cover it up until it's been inspected. If they don't do that, they're not getting paid. So there'll be certain stages where they're going to be paid. The other thing too, sometimes it's not always possible because if you have a smaller contractor, they might not have the financial backing to do it. But if you do like a bid bond, so if someone's coming to your community and they're willing to put up some money to put a bid on your project, then you have a performance bond as well when they are awarded the project. What that does is it protects the community. If that contractor hires a bunch of sub-trades, doesn't pay their sub-trades, and then leaves, the community could essentially be stuck with the bill.
But it does start with the design process.
It does start with the design process.
With the right windows.
Exactly.
The right art factors, the right doors, with the right community.
Yep.
I mean, because and then you'll have a bid process that'll be equal to apples to apples. If not, and I don't think that not much of us here have the know-how to know exactly what type of windows are 17, the triple pan, this and that,
Yeah.
all the air barriers in between that, and we can't ask the community manager to check that out. So I think the architects that we choose must have the knowledge of the region.
Exactly.
In order to do what they're doing. Also, when you're working with the modular building companies, they do have to be CSA 277-08. If they are not, that means they're not inspected on the site, because what you were saying a minute ago is that you do have to check through the processes, but if it's built in the shop, you're not there.
Yeah.
So they do have to have that CSA. If they don't have that, then forget it. They shouldn't even be bidding.
Exactly.
on the job. Sorry, guys.
And you would put that, if you were to put an RFQ out to a modular home company, that would be a heading. You have to be certified to this standard. What I would also ask is making sure that it's designed for the area that, like the region that you're building. If you're in Northwest Territories, and like you said, if you're on the edge of, you know, if you're close to water, there's some things that should be taken into consideration when they're designing that building.
Can you elaborate more on big bonds and performance bonds?
So it's essentially like you go to an insurance company, there's bid bond insurance companies who would provide you a certain dollar amount. Like if you do $1 million project, you can ask for a 10% bid bond. So if you're doing $1 million project, you would have to come up with $100,000 bid bond to be able to even bid on that project. And then 25, you do, sometimes it's 50% for the performance bond. So 25 is your materials, 25 would be your your labor and sub trades and things like that. So at least there's something there to protect the community. So if someone walks away, you're not on the hook for it.
And to achieve the bid bond, the contractor has to have a number of experiences to
Yeah.
get that. So you get a little bit of background, you get a little bit of experience with the contractors.
Yeah.
You don't just have a first time looking to make money showing up, because they can't achieve a bid bond with that. One more question, because we're running out of time here. So we'll do one more and then.
Hi, Andrew. You mentioned the National Building Code and the Ontario Building Code standards. What would be the cost to upgrade a house from National Building Code to Ontario Building Code in terms of percentage or dollar value?
It'd be hard to say. I know with the Ontario Building Code, I don't think it would be a lot. Like you'd be adding a little more insulation in your attic. There's maybe a little more insulation on the outside of the building. You'd be getting trusses that were designed specifically for where your home is built. So if you have wind loads and you've got snow loads, so they'd maybe make the trusses a little stronger, put some more webbing in. A lot of times it's easier just to ask for a truss that's solar panel ready. And then, at least it's been beefed up to have a little more weight put on it. But I don't think it would be, initially it wouldn't be hard. After the fact, it's a little more challenging, but it's not impossible. You would probably, for your trusses, you'd have to get an engineer design to put in some extra support at the webbings and things like that, so.
Okay, we're gonna cut it off there. Great questions.
Yeah, it's awesome. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Andrew.
Yeah, thank you.
So I think there's a little bit of a break, and then there's. Can I just? Oh, you have some questionnaires on your table too, just to give a little feedback from the session. If you want to fill those out before you leave, that'd be great. We're also doing the hole punching at the door here, so if you want your ticket punched at the door. So we got a 15-minute break, and then we're going into another sessions at 2 o'clock.